My name is David Leeds. Now, I'm employed by Idaho's Department of Parks and Recreation, and one of my really despicable jobs here is I have to tell stories about this old building. Now, all the stories I have to tell you about it, though, I want to assure you that almost everything you hear today will be true. We are in front of the oldest standing building in the entire state of Idaho. It has been known through its history by 4 different names. When the construction began on the place, and that was way back in 1850, it was being built by the Catholic Jesuit priests and the Coeur d'Alene Indians. At that time it was known as the Mission of the Sacred Heart. And up over the doorway, that is an original painting representing the Sacred Heart. And that particular painting was done by Father Anthony Ravalli. Father Ravalli was also the architect who designed the building, and you'll get to see a lot more of his work when you go inside. Now, a few years later, in 1877, good old U.S. government changed the boundaries on the Coeur d'Alene Indian Reservation, and this mission was left outside of those new boundaries. So at that time, the Coeur d'Alene people had to leave, and Father Joseph Cataldo, he was the Father Superior of all of the Rocky Mountain missions. He sort of took the place over as administrative headquarters. And so it was from him that the place got its second name. When the railroads finally went through here, they named the nearby community in honor of him, Cataldo, and so the mission became known as the Cataldo Mission. Now in 1924, the Jesuits formally abandoned the mission, and they deeded the property over to the Boise Diocese. And this place fell into a bad state of disrepair. It wasn't until 1976 that the state of Idaho got a long-term lease to manage it as a state historical park, and it was a major restoration that was done to the place at that time. And that was when the place picked up its third name, became known as Old Mission State Park. Well, the nice thing is, 14 years ago, the Boise Diocese deeded ownership of the mission back to the Coeur d'Alene tribe. So the Coeur d'Alene people, the folks who actually built the mission, once again own the mission and the mission grounds. So the proper name today for the place is Coeur d'Alene's Old Mission State Park. Now when we go inside, there are a couple of pews up front. Those pews are fine to sit on. They did arrive here in the 1930s, so I would ask that you refrain from any unnecessary dancing on them, but sitting is quite all right. Now, if I get you to close the door after we go in, that's our tricky method for trying to keep the birds outside. Let us go inside. Wonderful, tricky. Go ahead and have a seat in the pews. Now, a few things to tell you about the inside of the mission. When they did that restoration in 1976, they worked very hard to preserve as much of the original work as they could. So 80% of what you're looking at here on the inside of the building is still the original work of the Jesuits and of the Coeur d'Alenes. In 1850, there were no railroads out there. There were no roads out there. Travel from one place to the next involved a time-honored method. Staff in hand. This was the tool we would use to turn those huge white pines into square timbers. Now, some of those trees we would drop a mile upstream from here. And it was human power to move them. Oh, you could get them rolling down the hill and into the river, and you could float them down below. But it was human power to get them up on top of this knoll. And then you've got a round tree, and you want to make it square. Now you can do that by taking a cord, fastening it at the end of the tree, and then you stretch that cord the entire length. pull it taut, fasten it in the other end. That tight cord makes a nice, straight guideline. Take your broad axe, and you begin working your way down that guideline. You start at one end of the tree, work your way down the entire bed, and when you finally get to the other end, that's gyps fall. Then you go back, and you do that again. Then you go back, you do that again. Then you go back, and you do that again. Eventually, you get a smooth, flat side. That's one side. You have 3 more you need to do. That's one timber. You have over 3 dozen that you need to prepare using this tool. Now, once you have your timbers prepared, you need to have a way to fasten them together. No nails. No one packs in the weight on a bunch of nails. Instead, we brought tools similar to this. Does anyone out there happen to know the name of this tool?
Auger.
You are very close. You are looking at the original cordless handrail. We call them augers. This was the tool you would use to fasten timbers together. Now, the way it would work, you first have to take your broad axe and begin squaring off a timber. And when you had finally created a flat side, you could take a chisel and chisel out a hole in it. Then you would take your broad axe and begin squaring off a beam. And make that beam a perfect fit for the hole you chiseled out of your timber. You put the beam into the timber and using the auger, drill a hole through both of them. You insert a wooden peg, and you have a very strong fit. If you look at the postal beam construction today, you can still see the giant wooden pegs that hold those together. It's been over 160 years, holding just fine. Now that made the framework. We needed to construct walls. We did not pack in any saws, so there was no way to cut boards. Instead, we chose to use the material that we had available. What we had available were little willow saplings, little tree saplings that were a couple of inches in diameter. We would take a large auger and go over to these big timbers and begin drilling holes. In the side of the timber, you could drill a hole, then about a foot higher, another hole, about a foot higher, another hole. You do that the entire length of the timber. Then you can take your willow sapling and put the end of it in the hole in the timber. Bend it, put the other end in a hole in the timber on the other side. Now that would hold it in place. Put one above that, that. So it started looking just like a giant ladder. Then Father Ravali asked the Coeur d'Alenes, they called themselves the Chashuonch. He asked the Chashuonch to go down to the river and begin cutting down the river grasses. Now, the river grasses around here can grow to a height of 7 to 8 feet. And he showed them how you could take an armful of that cut grass, carry it over, drape it over the willow sapling, and then you braid it. Just like you braid hair. Go back, get another armful of grass, carry it over, hang it, and braid it. Eventually, you get a braided grass wall. Then Father Ravali asked the Chashuonch to take baskets and go down to the river. Fill those baskets with river mud. Carry that mud back up here on top of the knoll And he showed them how you could take a handful of that mud and go over and work it into that brass wall. Go back, get another handful of mud, carry it over, work it into that brass wall. Now, all of the Chashawooks wanted to help with the building of the mission. It was their church. Everyone wanted to participate, including the children. So Father Ravali showed the children how they could take a handful of mud and go over and work it into that brass wall. Children are not stupid. It did not take them long to realize that picking up a handful of mud and walking over it and rubbing it into the brass wall was very important. Much better to pick up a handful of mud and step back and throw. And the entire mission was built by the biggest mud fight ever seen in the Northwest. And as the walls were going up, Brother Hubrix began carving the trim for the ceiling. Now he would spend 10 years carving that trim. Carve it down here, and then attach it up there. No glue. What he had was pine sap. Very sticky, but it doesn't hold for very long. It held long enough. Brother Hubrix could attach it to the ceiling and using a tiny auger, drill tiny holes. And if you look down the strips of trim today, you can see little indentations in the middle of the strips. That's where Brother Hubrix drilled and pegged it. And when he finally finished that ceiling, he presented it to the Chashawooks. Said, now, ceiling represent the heavens, sky above you. The Chashawooks looked at it and said, no. If that's to be the sky, it's wrong. If that's to be the sky, it needs to be blue. Brother Hubrix told them, we do not have blue paint, not out here. So the Chashawooks began gathering huckleberries. Lots and lots of ripe, juicy purple huckleberries. They would bring in basket after basket of berries. Put them together in a huge basket. Then one lucky child got to step into that basket and start squashing those berries. And the purple juice was coming up around their legs and their waist. And others would come over with small baskets and fill them with that purple huckleberry stain. And they climbed the scaffolding up to the ceiling and they began painting the ceiling. And purple juice was running down their arms and in their faces. And they had purple people everywhere. But eventually they painted the entire ceiling. And when it dried, it turned blue, the color of the sky. And Father Ravali began his work on the inside of the church. Now he had seen beautiful altars back in Italy, where he was born. Altars that were carved out of marble. But there was no marble out here. So instead, Father Ravali chose to carve the entire main altar out of white pine. And then he painted it to make it look as though it were marble. And when you go around behind it and look at how he actually put it together, you can see that all of the panels that on the front are colored red, on the back, they're just held up there in place with little shims. But that way Father Ravali could easily remove them and then replace them with panels of a different color, depending upon the liturgical season. And Father Ravali wanted decorations for the altar. But he used for materials out here. Now, the first winter we were here, we were sharing some canned food. Got to looking at that empty tin can. Realized there was a purpose to that metal. You didn't just throw it away. You trimmed the bottom off of a can and crimped the edges. You can fashion a candle holder. And if you flatten out a can and trim it with a knife, you can make a decoration. And if you take a decoration and attach it to candle holder. You know what you get? A decorative candle holder. And Father Raleigh wanted to decorate the walls around the main altar. But all he had was old newspaper. Still, he put up the newspaper on the bottom 4 feet, going all the way around the main altar. And then he hand-painted it to make it look as though it were wallpaper. But he had a problem when he started doing his painting. No paintbrushes. What he had was our mission cat. He discovered he could trim the hair from the tail of our cat and make his own paintbrushes. And over on Mary's altar, there's a small tabernacle with a painting of Christ with a Sacred Heart. And that painting was done by Father Raleigh, using a cat hair paintbrush. Make do with what is available. Father Raleigh wanted statues for the mission. He had seen beautiful carvings back in Italy, but there was no granite for carving out here. So instead we have John the Evangelist and our Blessed Virgin, both carved by Father Raleigh, carved out of white pine, and then painted to make them look as though they were stone. Now today, as you tour the mission, we hope you get an appreciation for the devotion and effort both the Jesuits and the Cheshire took in building the place. And when you peek back into the sacristy rooms, the little rooms back behind the main altar, back there you can still see the original wattle and daub construction. They never bothered covering up those mud and straw walls back there. There are places back there where you can see fingerprints in the mud. Someone 160 years ago, we don't know whether it was a child or an adult, but someone in their devoted effort to build their church has left their mark on that wall. You can still see it today. I hope you'll appreciate their efforts. Now, after you finish touring the mission, the parish house next door is also open for touring. That was where the Jesuits actually lived, so their heritage is on exhibit in that building. And the cemetery is also open for touring. You can access that either by walking down the road or following the sidewalk around the visitor center. And this time of year, we have the beautiful camas blossom down there, the blue flower that you see on the hillside. Camas root was a cherished food for the Cheshire. But at this time, I would like to invite you to get an up-close and personal look at our mission, and I thank you very much for your attention.
We just call that painting because you said on the side.
I hadn't heard that story until the other day, and yet David White was visiting here.
Oh, really? Well, I thought you said you were the one.
No, that was a new one to me. I like it. It's just such a fun building to talk about. I'm used to a very critical audience. This time of year, we've got fourth graders making field trips here. Yeah, it doesn't matter what story you're telling them, they've got X amount of time to listen. Yes, sir. Americans all for it.
I was just looking at the walls in here. I mean, they, Aspen and Sun Valley, they pay a fortune to build walls like that today. I mean, to get that kind of distressed look.
Right.